Chapter 1. The child in the snowwind screamed through the narrow streets of Grey Hollow like a living thing, and Alara Thorne pulled her threadbare shawl tighter as she hurried home through the storm. Snow lashed her face, each flake a tiny knife against her already raw skin. She kept her head down, eyes fixed on the cobblestones, barely visible beneath the accumulating white. Counting steps the way she'd counted everything else since she'd fled to this forgotten corner of the world 6 months ago. 37 steps to the corner. 18 more to her door. She'd stopped hoping for warmth, stopped hoping for much of anything. The stone cottage she rented from the absent landlord was as cold inside as out, but it was hers, and it was hidden, and that was enough. After what happened in the capital, after Marcus's betrayal, after the trial that stripped her of her reputation and her father's name being forgotten was the only mercy she could afford, the wind shifted, carrying something that made her pause. A sound, small and desperate beneath the howl of the storm. Alara lifted her head, squinting through the whiteout. There, huddled against the stone wall beside her door, was a shape too small to be an adult. A child, she realized, her heart lurching. A child sitting motionless in the snow, wearing nothing but a thin nightdress, pale arms wrapped around pale knees. Dear God, Alara breathed, stumbling forward. Child, what are you? She dropped to her knees beside the little girl, reaching out to touch her shoulder. The skin beneath her fingers was ice cold, but the child's eyes opened large and dark and strangely calm for someone freezing to death. Please, the girl whispered. Her lips were blue. He said to wait here. He said someone kind would come. Who said that? Where are your parents? Alara was already shrugging out of her shawl, wrapping it around the tiny shoulders. The child couldn't be more than 7 or 8, with black hair plastered to her skull and an unsettling stillness to her features. Never mind. Inside. Now. The girl didn't resist as Alara scooped her up to light, far too light, and fumbled with the key to her door. The lock stuck in the cold, and she cursed under her breath, jiggling it until the mechanism finally gave. They tumbled inside together, and Alara kicked the door shut against the wind. The cottage was barely warmer than outside, but at least the walls blocked the wind. Alara carried the child to the hearth and set her down on the worn rug, her hands already working to build up the fire from the morning's embers. She added, kindling, then logs, blowing on the coals until flames caught and began to spread warmth into the small room. What's your name? Alara asked, turning back to the girl. She grabbed the only blanket from her bed and wrapped it around the small form. I'm Alara. You're safe now. The child studied her with those 2 old eyes. Sira. That's pretty. Alara rubbed the girl's arms through the blanket, trying to bring warmth back into her limbs. The skin was so cold it burned to touch. Who told you to wait outside my door, Sira? Was it your father? My brother. Sira's voice was soft, almost melodic. He said you would help. He said you were the one. Something in those words made the hair on Alara's neck rise, but she pushed the feeling aside. The child was clearly in shock, possibly delirious from the cold. The one for what, sweetheart? Sira tilted her head, and for just a moment, something flickered in her expression, something too knowing, too ancient for a child's face. The one who still remembers how to be kind. Alara's throat tightened. She turned back to the fire, adding another log. I have some broth left from yesterday. Let me heat it for you. She worked in silence, her mind racing. No child should be out in a storm like this, dressed like that. No responsible guardian would send a little girl into the snow to find help. This felt wrong in ways she couldn't name. But what choice did she have? Leave the child outside to freeze? The broth warmed quickly, and she poured it into a chipped bowl. Bringing it to Sira, the girl took it with small, careful hands and sipped delicately, her eyes never leaving Alara's face. When the storm passes, I'll help you find your brother, Alara said, settling onto the floor beside her unexpected guest. He must be worried sick. He knows where I am. Sira set down the half-empty bowl. He's always known where I am. Then why he needed you to see me first? To choose. The girl reached out and placed one small, still too cold hand on Alara's wrist. Thank you for choosing. Before Alara could ask what that meant, Sira's eyes drifted closed. Within moments, the child's breathing had evened into sleep. Her small body finally relaxing against the blankets, Alara sat there in the firelight, watching this strange child sleep, and tried to ignore the creeping certainty that something fundamental had just shifted in her quiet, hidden life. Outside, the wind continued to scream, but beneath it, she could have sworn she heard the sound of footsteps in the snow. slow, measured, coming closer, and then stopping. Just outside her door, Alara held her breath, waiting for a knock that never came. When she finally worked up the courage to crack open the door and peer outside, there was nothing but fresh snow and a single set of footprints leading away into the darkness, footprints too large to belong to a child, spaced too far apart to be human. She closed the door, locked it, and pulled the sleeping girl closer to the fire. Whatever she'd just invited into her life, it was already too late to send it away. Chapter 2. The stranger at dawn. Alara woke to silence. The storm had passed sometime in the night, leaving behind that peculiar stillness that followed violent weather, a hush so complete it felt like the world was holding its breath. Gray dawnlight filtered through the frost-etched window, and she blinked against it, disoriented until memory returned in a rush. The child. She sat up quickly, her neck protesting from sleeping upright in the chair she'd pulled close to the hearth. Sira lay exactly where Alara had left her, curled beneath the blanket, her small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. In sleep, she looked like any ordinary child, vulnerable and innocent. Nothing like the unsettling creature who'd spoken with that too old voice. Alara rubbed her face, trying to shake off the lingering unease. Exhaustion and fear had made her imagine things. Footprints in the snow, the sense of being watched. Children said strange things when they were traumatized and half frozen. There was nothing supernatural here, only a lost girl who needed help. She was just standing to check the meager supplies in her cupboard when 3 sharp knocks echoed through the cottage. Alara froze. No one came to her door. No one even knew she lived here except the landlord's agent, who collected rent once a month. And he'd already come and gone 2 weeks ago. The knocking came again, precise, deliberate, patient. She glanced at Sira, but the child hadn't stirred. Moving quietly, Alara crossed to the door and pressed her ear against the wood. "Who's there?" "I've come for my sister." The voice was male, deep and cultured, with an accent she couldn't place, something old world and refined that didn't belong in a backwater town like Grey Hollow. "I believe she spent the night under your protection." Alara's hand went to the lock, but didn't open it. "How do I know you're her brother? How do I know you didn't abandon her in the storm?" A pause. When he spoke again, there was something that might have been approval in his tone. Sensible. "I did not abandon her. I sent her to your door specifically because the alternative was far more dangerous for her. The storm provided cover." "Cover from what?" "From those who would use her to punish me." Another pause. "My name is Caspian Morthan. The child is Sira. She is 7 years old. She dislikes carrots, and she has a habit of humming old lullabies when she thinks no one is listening." "Is that sufficient proof, or shall I continue?" Despite herself, Alara's lips twitched. The details were too specific to be fabricated. She undid the lock, but kept the door only partially open. Peering through the gap, the man on her doorstep stole the breath from her lungs. He was tall, well over 6 feet, dressed in black that seemed to drink the morning light. His coat was expensive, tailored to perfection, and completely impractical for Grey Hollow's muddy streets. But it was his face that held her captive. Sharp cheekbones, a mouth carved from marble, and eyes so pale they looked silver in the dawn. His hair was dark and pulled back severely, emphasizing the inhuman symmetry of his features. He looked like a painting of a fallen angel. "Beautiful and terrible and wrong. You're not from around here," Alara said stupidly. One corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile. "No, I am not." His silver eyes studied her with unnerving intensity. "You brought Sira inside. You gave her warmth and food. Why?" The question caught her off guard. "Why?" "She was freezing to death on my doorstep." "What kind of monster would leave a child to die?" "Many would. Most have." He tilted his head slightly, and she had the distinct impression of being catalogued, assessed, and filed away for future reference. "You ask no questions about payment or reward. You don't demand to know why I would send a child into a storm. You simply helped." "She needed help," Alara said flatly. "That's reason enough." Something flickered in those pale eyes, surprise, or perhaps recognition. "Indeed." He gestured toward the interior of her cottage. "May I see her?" "I give you my word that I mean neither you nor Sira any harm." Alara should have said no. Every instinct screamed that letting this man inside was dangerous, that he carried menace like other men carried pocket watches, concealed but always present. But Sira had been waiting for him, had spoken of him with trust, if not warmth. She stepped back and opened the door. Caspian Morthen moved with a grace that was almost liquid, crossing her threshold without seeming to walk. He stopped just inside, his attention immediately finding the sleeping child by the fire. For a long moment, he simply stood there, and Alara saw something break through that perfect control relief, raw and naked. Before he schooled his expression back to neutrality, "She's unharmed," Alara said quietly. "Cold, but she warmed up once I got the fire going. You saved her life." He said it as a statement of fact. The temperature last night would have killed her within the hour. Then why? Because the alternative was worse. He moved to Sira's side, kneeling with that same impossible grace. One long-fingered hand touched the child's forehead with surprising gentleness. "There are worse things than freezing, Miss Thorne. Things that hunt in the darkness, and care nothing for mortal suffering." The use of her name made her stomach drop. "How do you know who I am?" He glanced back at her, and for the first time, she saw something almost like sympathy in that inhuman face. "I make it my business to know the people in this town, especially those who arrive suddenly, fleeing scandal and heartbreak, seeking to disappear." He rose to his full height. "Alara Thorne, daughter of the late Magistrate Thorne, accused of conspiracy and theft by her former fiancé Marcus Vane. Charges dismissed for lack of evidence, but reputation destroyed nonetheless. You've been here 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days." Alara's hands clenched into fists. "Get out." In a moment, he moved toward the door, but paused beside her. Up close, she could see that his skin had an odd quality to smooth to perfect, like porcelain. "You showed Sira kindness when you owed her nothing. That is a rare quality, Miss Thorne. Rare enough that I find myself in your debt. I don't want anything from you." Nevertheless, he reached into his coat and withdrew a card-heavy stock, expensive, with a single address embossed in silver. "If you find yourself in danger, come to this place. Day or night, you will be admitted and protected." "Why would I be in danger?" Those silver eyes held hers. "Because you helped my sister. Because kindness in this world is noticed by those who cherish it, and by those who seek to destroy it." He opened the door, letting in a gust of cold air. "We will not meet again unless you choose it. But know this, you are under my protection now. Whether you accept it or not." He was gone before she could respond. Moving into the gray morning like a shadow returning to its source, Alara stood frozen, the card heavy in her hand, and wondered what exactly she had invited into her life. Behind her, Sira's eyes opened, dark and knowing. "He likes you," the child whispered. "That's good. You'll need him before this is over." Chapter 3. Unnatural horse. 3 days passed before Alara saw Caspian Morthen again, but she felt his presence everywhere. Sira had disappeared by mid-morning that first day, gone as silently as she'd arrived, leaving behind only the faint scent of lavender and a bone-deep certainty that nothing in Alara's life would ever be simple again. The card Caspian had given her sat on the mantel like a coiled snake, ignored, but impossible to forget. She tried to return to her routine, rose before dawn to fetch water from the well, took in mending from the few townsfolk who deigned to employ a disgraced woman, kept her head down and her door locked. But the quietness she'd cultivated so carefully had developed cracks, and through them seeped questions she didn't want to ask. Who sent a child into a storm for protection? What kind of danger required such desperate measures? And why did Caspian Morthen's eyes reflect light like an animal's? On the 3rd night, she woke to the sound of breaking glass. Alara sat bolt upright in bed, heart hammering. The sound had come from downstairs, a window, maybe, or a bottle knocked from a shelf. She strained her ears in the darkness, listening. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through her cottage. Terror locked her limbs for a precious moment before survival instinct took over. She grabbed the fire poker from beside her bed, the only weapon she owned, and crept toward the stairs. Moonlight filtered through the window, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. The footsteps had stopped. Alara descended one stair at a time, testing each step to avoid creaking. Her hands trembled around the poker's handle. When she reached the ground floor, she saw immediately what was wrong. The window beside her door hung open, cold air pouring through the shattered pane, and standing in the center of her small living space was a man, not Caspian. This one was shorter, stockier, with a cruel slash of a mouth and eyes that caught the moonlight with an amber gleam. He smiled when he saw her, revealing teeth that seemed slightly too sharp. "Alara Thorne," he said, his voice a rasp that raised goosebumps on her arms. "The mortal who sheltered Morthen's whelp. How very charitable of you. Get out of my house." She raised the poker, trying to keep her voice steady. I don't know what you want, but oh, I think you do. He took a step closer, and she noticed he moved oddly to fluid, like Caspian had, but without the grace. Morthen's put his protection on you. That makes you interesting. That makes you leverage. The word clicked something into place in her mind. Syrah's words. Things that hunt in the darkness. Caspian's warning. You'll be in danger because you helped my sister. I don't know anything about your conflict with Morthen, Alara said, backing toward the stairs. The child came to my door freezing. I gave her shelter. That's all. That's never all. The man's smile widened. Not with our kind. Every kindness is a debt. Every debt is a chain. And Caspian Morthen has just chained himself to a fragile little mortal who doesn't even know what he is. Then enlighten me. The voice came from the doorway cold. Controlled and laced with lethal promise, Caspian stood framed in the entrance. His pale eyes fixed on the intruder with such intensity that the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He wasn't wearing a coat, despite the winter night, and Alara noticed for the first time that he cast no shadow in the moonlight. The amber-eyed man hissed an inhuman sound. Morthen, I wasn't informed you kept such close watch on your pets. Gideon Rourke. Caspian stepped inside, moving between Alara and the intruder with deliberate precision. You break the accord by entering a protected dwelling uninvited. House Morthen can demand blood price for this transgression. House Morthen is dying, Gideon spat. Your father's treaties mean nothing now that he's ash. The new lords don't honor your precious rules. Then the new lords are fools. Caspian's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. Get out, while you still can. For a moment, Alara thought Gideon would refuse. Tension crackled between the two men like static before a lightning strike. Then Gideon laughed a sound like breaking bones and turned toward the broken window. Keep your mortal, Morthen. We'll see how long she survives what's coming. He paused on the sill, amber eyes finding Alara. Do you know what he is? Little charity case? Has he told you why he doesn't eat? Why? He only walks at night. Why? His sister doesn't age. Enough. The word cracked like a whip. Gideon vanished through the window, moving faster than her eyes could track. One moment he was there. The next, only empty space and swirling snow remained. Silence crashed down like a physical weight. Alara stood frozen, the poker still raised, her mind struggling to process what she'd just witnessed. The speed, the inhuman voices, the way Caspian had appeared without her hearing him approach. You're not human, she said finally. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. Neither of you. Caspian turned to face her, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw something like regret in his expression. No, we're not. What are you? He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth she could bear. Then he moved to the broken window and ran his fingers along the shattered glass. With a gesture she didn't understand, his hand moving in a complex pattern, the glass began to reform. Shards lifting from the floor and fusing back together until the window was whole again. Magic. Impossible. The word your kind uses is vampire, he said quietly, still not looking at her. Though that encompasses much we are not, and fails to capture much we are. We are old, Miss Thorne. Older than your country. Older than your language. We live in the spaces between your world and death, sustained by blood and bound by laws your kind has long forgotten. Alara's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the bottom stair, the poker clattering from her nerveless fingers. The child, she whispered. Syrah is my sister. She was turned at 7 centuries ago, and will remain 7 forever. He finally looked at her, and she saw ancient grief in those pale eyes. I sent her to you because I knew House Rourke was hunting her. I knew they would kill her to hurt me. And I knew, call it instinct. Call it desperate hope, that you were the kind of person who would save a freezing child without asking questions. You used me as a shield. Yes. No apology. Just stark honesty. And in doing so, I marked you. Gideon was right about one thing. You are leverage now. The moment you sheltered Syrah, you became entangled in a war between vampire houses that has raged for 500 years. Alara pressed her hands to her face, trying to breathe. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. Vampires were stories, myths, gothic novels to frighten children, but she'd seen Gideon's amber eyes, seen Caspian repair glass with a gesture, felt the wrongness radiating from both of them like cold from ice. What do you want from me? She asked through her fingers. I want you to survive. His voice softened, barely perceptible, but there. I want you to let me protect you from the consequences of your own kindness. And perhaps, he paused, perhaps I want to understand why you did it. Why, you helped a strange child, when you have every reason to trust no one. She lowered her hands and met his eyes. Because no one helped me when I needed it. Because I know what it feels like to be abandoned in the cold. Something shifted in his expression, recognition, understanding, a crack in that perfect control. Then let me help you now, Caspian said. Let me teach you the rules of this world you've stumbled into. Because Gideon was right about one more thing. Something is coming. And when it arrives, you'll need to know how to survive it. Alara looked at this impossible creature standing in her cottage, offering protection she hadn't asked for, dragging her into a darkness she'd never imagined. She should refuse. Send him away. Flee Grey Hollow and never look back. Instead, she heard herself say, tell me the rules. Chapter 4. Lessons in Darkness. Caspian didn't sit, he never seemed to, but he gestured for Alara to return to her chair by the fire, which had burned down to embers during the confrontation. With another of those impossible movements, he was suddenly crouched before the hearth, adding wood with hands that moved too precisely to be mortal. First rule, he said, without preamble, his back still to her. We cannot enter a dwelling uninvited. Gideon broke through your window because the threshold doesn't apply to broken barriers. Always keep your home sealed. Always. Alara pulled a blanket around her shoulders, though she doubted any amount of wool could warm the chill settling into her bones. He called it an accord. What is that? The Treaty of Ash and Blood, signed in 1547 between the 5 great houses. Caspian turned, the firelight casting sharp shadows across his angular face. It established laws to prevent our kind from tearing human civilization apart in our wars. Protected dwellings. Rules of engagement. Consequences for breaking covenant. 5 houses, Alara repeated, trying to anchor herself in facts. Your House Morthen. Gideon is House Rourke. What are the others? House Valyria, who control the southern territories. House Crane, who keep the eastern borders. And House Isambard, who, he paused, something dark crossing his features, who were destroyed 70 years ago in the Purge. We speak of them in past tense now. The way he said it, heavy with old grief, made her ask, were you there? I am 347 years old, Miss Thorne. I have been there for a great many tragedies. He rose in one fluid motion. The houses maintain balance through blood oaths, territorial agreements, and strategic marriages. When that balance fails, we go to war. And when we go to war, humans die in the crossfire. Alara absorbed this, her scholar's mind trained by her father to parse legal documents and political maneuvering, automatically sorting information. So House Rourke is challenging House Morthen's power. That's why they hunt Syrah, to eliminate your heirs. Partially correct. Caspian moved to her window, gazing out at the snow-covered street. Gideon mentioned my father. Lucian Morthen was lord of our house for 6 centuries. He maintained the accord through sheer force of will and strategic brilliance. 3 months ago, he was murdered. The body was burned so thoroughly that true death was assured. I'm sorry, Alara said, and meant it. Whatever else this creature was, he grieved like anyone who'd lost family. Caspian's shoulders tensed slightly, acknowledgement perhaps. His death destabilized everything. I inherited leadership, but I am. He turned back to her, and for the first time, she saw vulnerability beneath the supernatural control. I am not my father. I lack his ruthlessness, his willingness to sacrifice pawns for victory. House Rourke senses weakness, and they're moving to absorb our territories before I can consolidate power. And Syrah is my greatest liability and my last tie to humanity. His voice softened when he spoke of the child. She was my sister in mortal life. I was 23 when I was turned. She was 7. I couldn't bear to lose her, so I damned her to eternity. I have spent 300 years ensuring she experiences as much joy as this cursed existence allows. Gideon knows that. Knows I would burn the world to keep her safe. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Alara understood that kind of desperate love, the kind that made you stupid, made you vulnerable. She'd felt it for her father before his death, had mistaken it for what she felt for Marcus before his betrayal. Second rule, Caspian continued, pulling himself back to the lesson. We require blood to survive, but the accord forbids taking it without consent. Most houses maintain agreements with willing donors, humans who trade blood for protection, wealth, or the promise of eventual turning. You're telling me there are people who volunteer for this? Some crave immortality. Others simply need what we can provide. He watched her reaction carefully. I won't lie and claim we're noble. We're predators, Miss Thorne. We've simply learned to be civilized predators. Alara's mind raced. The willing donors, that's how you avoid killing. Yes, though newer vampires struggle with control. The hunger is overwhelming at first. It takes decades to master. He paused. I haven't killed defeat in over 200 years. That matters to me, even if it shouldn't. There was something almost fragile in that confession, a need for her to understand he wasn't a monster, or at least, not only a monster. Alara found herself responding to it, despite every logical reason to keep her distance. Third rule, Caspian said, and perhaps most important for your survival, we cannot bear sunlight. We sleep during the day in a state near death. We are vulnerable then, truly vulnerable. If you ever need to flee from one of us, do it at dawn. Why are you telling me how to escape you? His smile was bitter. Because I'm trying to keep you alive, and survival requires knowledge. Even knowledge that could be used against me. He crossed back to her, stopping just at the edge of proper distance. You've been thrust into this world through no fault of your own. The least I can do is arm you with truth. What's the fourth rule? Alara asked, pulling the blanket tighter. That we remember everything. Every slight, every kindness, every drop of blood spilled. We are creatures of long memory and longer grudges. House Rourke hasn't forgotten that House Morthen killed their patriarch in 1782. I haven't forgotten that House Rourke slaughtered my closest friend in retaliation. These cycles of violence span centuries, Miss Thorne. They consume everything they touch. He said it with such weariness that Alara glimpsed the weight of his years, hundreds of them, stretching back before her country existed, filled with loss and war and an isolation she couldn't fathom. You're tired, she said quietly. Caspian's head snapped toward her, surprise naked on his face, as if no one had seen that in him before, or perhaps no one had dared to say it aloud. Yes, he admitted, after a long moment. I am tired of war, tired of watching mortals. I've grown fond of age and die while I remain unchanged. Tired of this eternal chess game where the pieces scream. He closed his eyes briefly. But tired or not, I will protect what's mine. And you, through an accident of compassion, have become mine to protect. I didn't ask for that, I know. But here we are. He opened his eyes, and they were softer now, almost human. I'll post guards around your home, discreet, invisible to mortal eyes. I'll ward your windows against forced entry. And I'll return tomorrow night to continue your education. There's much more you need to know. And if I refuse? Alara asked, though she already knew she wouldn't. Then Gideon or someone like him will return. And next time I might not arrive in time to stop them. He moved toward the door, then paused. You asked me what I want from you, Miss Thorne. The truth? I want you to survive long enough that I can understand why your kindness exists in a world this cruel. Why? You're different from the humans who would have left Syrah to freeze. Maybe I'm not different, Alara said. Maybe I'm just broken in ways that make me stupid. Caspian's smile was unexpected, genuine, and tinged with something like fondness. Then we have that in common. He left as silently as he'd arrived, and Alara sat alone by the fire, wondering how her simple, hidden life had transformed into something so impossibly complex. Outside, she heard the soft tread of boots and snow guards taking up their positions, protecting her whether she wanted it or not. She touched the card on the mantle, tracing the embossed address with one finger, and wondered when she'd stopped being afraid and started being curious. Chapter 5. Blood and Boundaries. Caspian returned the following night, as promised, carrying a leather-bound book that looked older than any nation Alara could name. She'd spent the day in a fog of exhaustion and disbelief, jumping at shadows, seeing amber eyes in every corner. The guards he'd posted were invisible to her, but she felt their presence, a weight in the air, a sense of being observed that should have terrified her, but instead brought strange comfort. When his knock came precisely at sunset, she opened the door without hesitation. You didn't ask who it was, Caspian observed, stepping inside. Tonight he wore deep gray instead of black, and his hair was loose around his shoulders. It made him look less severe, though no less dangerous. Your guards would have stopped anyone else, Alara replied, closing the door behind him. Besides, I'm learning to recognize your knock. 3 strikes, evenly spaced, patient. Something flickered in his expression, pleasure perhaps at being known. Observant. That will serve you well. He set the book on her small table. Tonight's lesson, house politics and how to navigate them without getting killed. Alara had prepared tea, a mortal habit that seemed absurd given her guest, but it gave her hands something to do. Do you drink? Tea, I mean. Or is it only blood? He said it without flinching. We can consume other things for pleasure, though they provide no sustenance. Tea would be welcome. She poured to cups, oddly gratified by this small normalcy. They settled at the table, the ancient book between them, and for a moment it felt almost domestic to people sharing tea on a winter evening. Except one of them was a 300-year-old vampire, Lord, and the other was a disgraced magistrate's daughter hiding from her past. Caspian opened the book, revealing pages covered in elegant script and detailed genealogies. The 5 houses, now 4 each, control territories and maintain networks of turned vampires, human servants, and allied families. House Morthen holds the northern reaches, including Grey Hollow and 17 other townships, his finger traced lines on a map. House Rourke controls the western mountains. House Valyria has the southern coast. House Crane maintains the eastern forests. We've coexisted for centuries through careful balance. Each house has strengths. Morthen has numbers and old alliances. Rourke has wealth and mercenary loyalty. Valyria has maritime trade. Crane has... He paused. Crane has stayed neutral so long they've become nearly irrelevant. And House Isambard? Alara asked. What did they have? Caspian's jaw tightened. Knowledge. They were scholars, historians, keepers of our oldest laws. When the purge came, when vampire hunters discovered their stronghold, we lost more than lives. We lost our memory. The grief in his voice was palpable. Alara reached across the table without thinking, her hand covering his. His skin was cool but not cold, solid and real beneath her palm. He stared at their joined hands as if he'd forgotten what touch felt like. I'm sorry, Alara said softly, for what your kind lost. Your kind did the killing, he replied, but there was no heat in it. A mortal crusade led by a fanatic who believed he was purifying the world. He burned House Isambard's library with scholars still inside, hundreds of years of accumulated wisdom. Gone to ash. Is that why you're tired? Because you've watched too much burn? Caspian lifted his eyes to hers, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch recognition, gratitude, a desperate need to be understood. Yes, he whispered, because I've watched everything burn, over and over, and I'm beginning to forget why we rebuild. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Then Caspian carefully withdrew his hand and turned back to the book, rebuilding his walls with visible effort. House Rourke wants our territories, he continued, his voice steady again. They've been recruiting aggressively, turning humans without proper vetting, offering immortality to anyone with useful skills or information. It's making them strong but unstable. Gideon himself is barely a century old, too young to lead, but his sire was killed in the same attack that took my father. So you're both new to power, Alara observed. Both trying to prove yourselves. Yes, which makes this conflict particularly dangerous. We're both desperate. He flipped to another page showing complex symbols. These are blood oaths binding promises sealed with our essence. Breaking one means true death. My father had oaths with dozens of allied vampires. I've inherited some, but others have been released by opportunistic parties who see chaos as opportunity. Alara studied the symbols, her mind working. How does one become a vampire? You said Sira was turned. Does that mean it requires 3 things? Caspian interrupted. The victim must be drained nearly to death. The vampire must feed them their own blood. And the victim must die with vampire blood in their system. They wake the following night, transformed and ravenous. Ravenous, Alara repeated quietly. The hunger is overwhelming at first. New vampires have killed entire families in their first feeding frenzy. It's why the Accord forbids unauthorized turnings. Each new vampire is a potential massacre. He met her eyes. I've turned exactly 3 people in 300 years. Sira, because I couldn't bear to lose her. My Lieutenant Marcus, because he was dying of plague and begged for more time. And Thalia, a woman I loved, who chose eternity with me over mortal death. The name landed like a stone. Where is she now? Dead, truly dead. House Rourke killed her 70 years ago. His voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of someone who'd survived grief by refusing to feel it. They staked her in her day sleep and burned her body. Standard execution method. Alara's throat tightened. I'm sorry. So am I. He closed the book with careful precision. Which brings me to tonight's critical lesson. Vampire weaknesses. Sunlight, obviously. Decapitation. Fire. A wooden stake through the heart won't kill us, but it paralyzes us until removed. Silver burns our skin, and we cannot cross running water without severe pain. Why are you telling me this? Elara asked. These are vulnerabilities. You're giving me weapons against you. Caspian stood, moving to her window. Because trust must be mutual to mean anything. Because I'm asking you to trust me with your safety, so I'm trusting you with my weaknesses. Because, he turned back to her, and his expression was raw. Because you're the first mortal in decades who's looked at me and seen a person instead of a monster or a means to power. That's rare enough to be worth the risk. Alar rose slowly, moving to stand before him. This close, she could see details she'd missed before, the absence of pulse in his throat, the preternatural stillness when he wasn't deliberately moving, the way his eyes reflected light like a cat's. What am I to you really? She asked. You say I'm under your protection, but I'm also leverage for your enemies. What happens when protecting me becomes inconvenient? It won't. The answer was immediate, fierce. I don't abandon those I've claimed, Alara. Not ever. It's perhaps my greatest flaw. I hold on when I should let go. The use of her first name, unguarded and familiar, sent warmth through her chest. And if I asked you to feed from me, to seal whatever bond this is with blood? She didn't know why she asked. Curiosity, perhaps. Or the desire to test the boundaries of whatever was building between them. Caspian went utterly still, his eyes darkening to mercury. Don't offer that lightly. I'm not. She held his gaze. I'm asking what it means. What happens if you feed from me? It creates a connection. His voice had dropped to something rough, almost hungry. I would taste your emotions, your thoughts. You would feel my presence even when I'm far away. It's intimate, Alara, more intimate than any mortal act. And it's addictive for both parties. Have you ever not since Thalia? He took a step back, breaking the intensity. I won't feed from you. You deserve the choice to walk away from this world when it becomes too much. Blood bonding would make that impossible. The rejection stung, though it shouldn't have. He was right, she barely understood this world, let alone the consequences of binding herself to it. Tomorrow night, Caspian said, moving toward the door, I'll bring Sira. She wants to thank you properly. And she's been asking about you incessantly. Alara smiled, despite everything. I'd like that. He paused at the threshold, looking back. You're handling this remarkably well. Most mortals would have fled or collapsed by now. Maybe I'm just too stubborn to do either, Alara replied. Or maybe I've already lost everything that mattered. This is terrifying, but it's also, she searched for the word, real, more real than anything in my old life. Caspian's smile was small but genuine. Then welcome to the darkness, Alara Thorn. Try not to let it consume you. He vanished into the night, and Alara stood in her doorway, watching shadows that might have been guards or might have been nothing at all. She was falling into something dangerous and impossible. And the terrifying part was that she didn't want to stop. Chapter 6. The attacker arrived the following evening with a bouquet of winter roses that shouldn't have existed in December deep. Crimson blooms that looked almost black in the firelight. Caspian grows them in the greenhouse, the child explained, settling into Alara's chair with the unsettling poise of someone far older than 7. He says beautiful things should survive winter. Alara arranged the roses in a chipped vase, touched by the gesture. They're lovely. Thank you. Caspian stood near the door, watching their interaction with an expression she was learning to read, carefully controlled affection mixed with bone-deep protectiveness. He'd brought wine tonight, a bottle so old the label had faded to illegibility. For you, he said, setting it on the table. From my father's collection. It seems appropriate to share it with someone who appreciates gifts without asking their value. The three of them settled into an evening that felt almost normal. Sira chattering about books she'd read and places she'd visited. Alara asking questions about vampire existence that the child answered with refreshing bluntness. Caspian interjecting corrections or additions with dry humor that made Alara laugh. So you really don't sleep in coffins? Alara asked, pouring her second glass of wine. That's absurd, Sira giggled. We sleep in beds like anyone else. Though Caspian has a reinforced chamber in the cellar for emergencies. It's very dramatic, all stone and iron locks. It's practical, Caspian corrected mildly. And it's saved my life twice. Alara was about to ask about those occasions when the temperature in the room plummeted. Caspian was on his feet instantly. his entire demeanor shifting from relaxed to lethal in a heartbeat. Sira, behind me, now. The child obeyed without question, her small face going pale. Alara stood, her hand instinctively reaching for the fire poker, though she knew it would be useless against whatever was coming. How many? Sira whispered. Caspian's head tilted, listening to something Alara couldn't hear. 5, maybe 6. Rourke's dogs. His silver eyes found Alara's. Get upstairs. Lock yourself in your bedroom. Don't come out until I call for you. I'm not leaving you two, this isn't a debate. His voice cracked like a whip. Go, now. The window exploded inward. Glass flew in a glittering arc as 3 figures crashed through, moving with that terrible, supernatural speed. Alara saw amber eyes, bared fangs, hands tipped with claws that looked more animal than human. Caspian met the first attacker mid-leap, his hand closing around the vampire's throat with enough force to crack bone. He threw the creature across the room into the far wall, which splintered under the impact. Upstairs, he roared at Alara, but she couldn't move, couldn't look away from the violence unfolding before her. Brutal, primal, nothing like the controlled man who'd shared wine with her moments ago. Caspian fought like something born from nightmares, all fluid grace and calculated savagery. Sira grabbed Alara's hand, yanking her toward the stairs. Please, the child begged. If they hurt you, he'll lose control completely. That broke through her paralysis. Alara ran, pulling Sira with her, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Behind them, she heard the crash of furniture, inhuman snarls, and Caspian's voice speaking in a language she didn't recognize, something old and commanding. They reached her bedroom and Alara slammed the door, shoving her dresser against it with Sira's surprising strength helping. The child's small frame belied power no 7-year-old should possess. Will he be all right? Alara asked, pressing her ear to the door. He's fought worse, but Sira's voice trembled. Though 5 is many even for him. Downstairs, something crashed with enough force to shake the cottage. Alara heard Caspian shout rage or pain. She couldn't tell, and her heart clenched with fear she had no right to feel for a vampire lord she'd known less than a week. Then, cutting through the chaos, came a voice that made her blood freeze. Morthen, send out the woman, and we'll leave the child alive. Gideon. She recognized that cruel rasp from their first encounter. Caspian's response was wordless, a sound of pure fury that made the windows rattle. He won't trade you, Sira said quietly. He'd rather die. That's insane, Alara whispered. I'm just a human. I'm nothing compared to your everything right now. The child's dark eyes were ancient and sad. You're the first person in decades who's made him want something beyond survival. Gideon knows that. He's trying to force Caspian to choose between protecting you and winning the fight. Alara's mind raced. She was leveraged the weakness Caspian had created by protecting her. Every moment he spent defending her was a moment he couldn't fight effectively. She pulled the dresser away from the door. What are you doing? Sira hissed, making sure he doesn't have to choose. Alara grabbed the fire poker she'd dropped earlier. Stay here. Lock the door behind me. You'll die. Maybe. Alara met the child's eyes. But I won't let him die protecting me. I've been the reason someone sacrificed themselves before. Never again. She slipped through the door before Sira could stop her, easing down the stairs with the poker gripped in both hands. Her heart hammered so hard she could barely hear over it, but she forced herself to keep moving. The scene below was carnage. Her furniture lay in splinters. Blood, dark and wrong-smelling, splattered the walls. 3 vampires lay motionless on the floor, their bodies twisted at unnatural angles. Caspian stood in the center of the destruction, facing Gideon and to others. His coat was torn, his hair wild, and blood ran from a gash on his cheek that was already healing. He looked magnificent and terrifying. Last chance, Morthen, Gideon taunted. The woman for safe passage. I'll paint these walls with your entrails first. Caspian's voice was utterly calm, the calm of absolute conviction. Alara reached the bottom of the stairs. He doesn't speak for me. Every head swiveled toward her. Caspian's face went from deadly calm to horrified fury in an instant. Alara, no, I have a counter-proposal, she interrupted, raising the poker like a sword. Her hands shook, but her voice stayed steady. You leave now, or I invoke the accord and report that House Rourke broke into a protected dwelling, threatened its inhabitants, and violated the Treaty of Ash and Blood. Gideon laughed. You? Report us to whom? To House Crane. Alara took a step forward, bluffing with every fiber of her being. Caspian told me they maintain neutrality. That means they enforce the accord when it's violated. I'm a mortal witness to your crimes. My testimony before their court would be inconvenient for you, wouldn't it? The laughter died. Gideon's amber eyes narrowed. You're clever. But mortal testimony means nothing without proof. The broken window is proof. The blood on my walls is proof. The bodies of your people are proof. She gestured to the fallen vampires. Unless you plan to kill both Caspian and me to silence us, which would only confirm your guilt. Silence fell, broken only by Caspian's harsh breathing. She could feel his eyes on her, burning with a mixture of terror and something that might have been pride. Gideon studied her for a long moment, then smiled sharp and cruel. You've got teeth, little mortal. I respect that. But this isn't over. He gestured to his remaining companions. Collect our dead. We're leaving. Smart choice, Alara said, though her knees were trembling so badly she could barely stand. The Rourke vampires gathered their fallen and moved toward the broken window. Gideon paused on the threshold, looking back at Caspian. Your pet has courage. Pity that won't save her when the real assault comes. His gaze shifted to Alara. Sleep well, Miss Thorne. Dream of the monster you're protecting. Ask yourself what he'll do when he gets hungry and you're the only warm body nearby. Then they were gone, vanishing into the winter night like smoke. Alara stood frozen, adrenaline crashing through her system. The poker fell from her nerveless fingers, clattering against the floor. Caspian was across the room in an instant, his hands gripping her shoulders. That was the most foolish, reckless, magnificent thing I've ever witnessed. His voice shook. You could have died. So could you, Alara replied. Her vision was starting to blur. I wasn't going to let you die for me. I'm already dead, Alara. You're alive. You're precious and mortal. And he stopped himself, closing his eyes. You shouldn't have come downstairs. Yes, I should have. She reached up, touching the cut on his cheek that was fading even as she watched. Because you would have fought until they killed you rather than give me up. I know that about you now. When he opened his eyes, they were molten silver. Yes, I would have. The admission hung between them, raw and true. Then Alara's knees finally gave out, and Caspian caught her before she hit the floor, lifting her easily against his chest. Sira, he called. She's safe. The child appeared at the top of the stairs, relief flooding her small face. I need to get her away from here, Caspian said. Gideon knows this location. It's not safe anymore. Take her to the estate, Sira suggested. She can stay in the east wing. Caspian looked down at Alara, who was already half-conscious from shock and wine and terror. Is that acceptable? Will you come? Alara managed a weak nod. Don't have much choice now, do I? His smile was sad and grateful all at once. No, I've thoroughly destroyed your quiet life. I'm sorry. Don't be, she whispered, as darkness claimed her. It was too quiet anyway. Chapter 7. The Morthen Estetiler awoke to luxury she'd forgotten existed. The bed beneath her was impossibly soft, piled with velvet coverlets in deep burgundy. Silk curtains enclosed the four-poster frame, filtering morning light to a soft glow. The room itself was vast, easily 3 times the size of her entire cottage, with soaring ceilings, ornate molding, and furniture that belonged in a museum. She sat up slowly, her head aching from wine and shock. The last thing she remembered was Caspian carrying her through snowy streets, his arms steady and cool around her, murmuring reassurances she couldn't quite hear. A soft knock preceded the door opening. A woman entered, perhaps 40, with graying hair pulled into a severe bun and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. She carried a breakfast tray laden with food that smelled divine. Good morning, Miss Thorne. I'm Mrs. Hadley, the estate housekeeper. Lord Morthen asked me to see to your comfort. She set the tray on a bedside table with practiced efficiency. There are clothes in the wardrobe your size, I believe. Lord Morthen was quite specific about the measurements. Alara flushed at the thought of Caspian noticing such details. Where am I exactly? Morthen House, the ancestral estate. You're in the East Wing guest chambers. Mrs. Hadley poured tea with steady hands. Lord Morthen is currently in day sleep, but he left instructions that you're free to explore the grounds. The library is particularly lovely, if you're inclined to read. Day sleep, Alara repeated, remembering Caspian's lessons. Vulnerable, defenseless. Is he safe here? Something softened in Mrs. Hadley's expression. You needn't worry for his safety, miss. The estate has protections older than England itself. No uninvited vampire can cross these thresholds. She moved toward the door, then paused. He asked me to tell you that you're a guest, not a prisoner. You may leave whenever you wish, though he hopes you'll stay until evening, so he can speak with you properly." After Mrs. Hadley left, Alara ate mechanically, her mind processing the past few days. A week ago, she'd been alone, hiding, wanting nothing but to be forgotten. Now she was in a vampire lord's mansion, having faced down an assault by creatures that shouldn't exist, feeling things for an immortal man that made no rational sense. She should leave, should run back to her ruined cottage, pack what little she owned, and flee to another anonymous town where vampires and ancient wars couldn't find her. Instead, she found herself opening the wardrobe. The dresses inside were exquisite day gowns and rich fabrics, each one perfectly sized as Mrs. Hadley had promised. Alara chose a deep green wool dress that felt like wearing clouds, then explored her chamber more thoroughly. A private bathing room with modern plumbing, a writing desk stocked with fine paper and ink, a bookshelf containing volumes in multiple languages, everything designed for comfort. For an extended stay, the thought should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like being seen, like someone had paid attention to what she might need and provided it without being asked. She ventured into the hallway, following Mrs. Hadley's directions toward the library. The estate was a labyrinth of corridors lined with portraits of severe-looking people more than ancestors, presumably spanning centuries of fashion. Some of the faces were familiar in their bone structure: Caspian's sharp cheekbones, Syrah's dark eyes, variations on a theme of aristocratic beauty. The library stole her breath. It was 3 stories tall, ringed with balconies, every wall covered floor to ceiling with books. Ladders on rolling tracks provided access to higher shelves. Morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating reading nooks with plush chairs and small tables. The smell of old paper and leather bindings filled the air like incense. Alara wandered through the stacks, running her fingers along spines. Philosophy, history, literature in a dozen languages. An entire section devoted to vampire lore, the very books Caspian had mentioned. Knowledge preserved when House Isambard burned. She pulled down a volume titled The Accord, Treaties and Betrayals, and settled into a chair near the window. The pages were thick vellum, covered in elegant script that dated the text to at least the 16th century. She read about the wars that had preceded the treaty, the human casualties, the vampire houses that had destroyed themselves through unchecked violence. Most mortals fall asleep reading vampire law within 10 minutes. Alara jumped, nearly dropping the book. Syrah stood in the doorway, wearing a simple blue dress, and looking even more like a normal child in daylight except for those ancient eyes. "I'm not most mortals," Alara replied. Recovering her composure, Syrah smiled and skipped over, climbing into the chair beside her. "No, you're definitely not." She peered at the book. "That's a boring one. If you want interesting vampire history, you should read Blood and Roses, a chronicle of House Morthen. It has all the scandals." "Scandals? Oh yes." Syrah's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Like when Caspian's great-great-grandfather fell in love with a werewolf and nearly started an interspecies war. Or when Caspian himself was almost executed for refusing to kill a human child during the purge." Alara's chest tightened. "He was almost executed for mercy?" Father intervened. "Barely." Syrah's expression grew serious. "Caspian has always been too kind for vampire politics. He feels things too deeply, cares too much about mortal lives. It's why some in our house think he's weak." "He's not weak," Alara said firmly. "Compassion isn't weakness. I know that. You know that. But most of our kind see it as a liability." Syrah leaned against Alara's shoulder, a gesture of pure trust that made Alara's throat ache. "That's why you're good for him. You remind him that kindness isn't futile." "I don't understand what I am to him," Alara admitted quietly. "He calls me his to protect, but it feels like more than duty." Syrah looked up at her with those 2 knowing eyes. "He hasn't had a friend in 80 years. Not since Thalia died. He has allies, servants, family, but not friends. Not someone who sees him as Caspian instead of Lord Morthen." She smiled sadly. "You looked at him and saw a person. That's rarer than you think." They sat in comfortable silence, Syrah eventually pulling her own book from the shelves, a collection of fairy tales in French. Alara returned to the vampire law text, absorbing information about blood bonds, territorial rights, and the complex hierarchy that governed immortal society. Hours passed. Mrs. Hadley brought lunch, an elaborate spread that Syrah picked at politely but didn't eat. The child's hunger, Alara realized with a chill, was for something else entirely. When do you need to feed? Alara asked carefully. Sierra didn't look up from her book. Every 3 days. I fed yesterday, so I'm fine. She paused. It bothers you. What we are. It terrifies me, Alara admitted. But you terrify me less than you should. Both of you. I keep forgetting you're predators. Good. Sierra closed her book. Because we keep forgetting your prey. That's how friendships work between our kinds, mutual forgetting of what we're supposed to be to each other. The wisdom in those words, spoken in a child's voice, made Alara smile despite herself. As afternoon faded toward evening, she felt a change in the air, a subtle shift in temperature and pressure that made her look toward the windows. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. He's waking, Sierra announced, sliding from her chair. He'll want to see you immediately. He always worries after battle. Alara's pulse quickened. Should I go to him, or he'll come to you? Sierra grinned. He's probably already on his way. She was right. Less than 5 minutes later, Caspian appeared in the library doorway, and Alara's breath caught at the sight of him. He'd changed clothes, now wearing a simple white shirt and dark trousers that somehow made him look more dangerous than the formal wear. His hair was damp, as if he'd just bathed. The cut on his cheek from last night's fight was gone entirely, leaving perfect, pale skin. His eyes found her immediately, scanning her from head to toe with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and cherished. You're well, he said, and the relief in his voice was naked. I was afraid when you collapsed. I'm fine, Alara assured him, standing. Mrs. Hadley has been wonderful, and Sierra kept me company. I'll leave you two alone, Sierra announced with a knowing smile, skipping toward the door. Try not to brood too much, brother. Caspian's lips twitched. I don't brood. You absolutely brood, Sierra called back, disappearing down the hallway. Silence descended, heavy with things unsaid. Caspian moved into the library, maintaining careful distance between them. Last night, he began, his voice rough. What you did was impossibly brave and utterly reckless. You could have, but I didn't, Alara interrupted. And neither did you. We survived, because you bluffed your way through a confrontation with 5 vampires using nothing but quick thinking and audacity. He shook his head, something like wonder in his expression. Do you have any idea how extraordinary that is? I had good teachers. She gestured to the books surrounding them, and I knew they couldn't kill me without proving their guilt. Logic, not courage. It was both. He took a step closer, and she saw the struggle in his face, the desire to close the distance warring with the need to maintain propriety. You saved my life, Alara. If you hadn't intervened, I would have fought until they killed me rather than let them take you. You saw that weakness and protected me from it. It's not weakness to care about people, she said softly. Chapter 8. Confession and Consequence. The following night settled into a rhythm that felt both dangerous and inevitable. Caspian spent his waking hours teaching Alara the intricacies of vampire politics, which houses allied with whom, the subtle language of blood oaths, the historical grievances that fueled current conflicts. But beneath the lessons ran a current of something else, a tension that built with every accidental touch, every lingering glance, every conversation that stretched long past midnight. They were falling, and both knew it. On the 5th night, Alara found Caspian in the estate's conservatory, a glass-enclosed garden where he grew impossible things. Winter roses bloomed alongside orchids that shouldn't survive this climate. Moonlight filtered through the glass ceiling, painting everything in silver. He stood among the roses, his back to her, utterly still, in that way vampires had when they forgot to mimic human movement. You don't have to pretend with me, Alara said softly, announcing her presence. Caspian turned, and she saw exhaustion in his face, not physical, but something deeper, soul weariness. Pretend what? To breathe, to shift your weight, to blink. She moved closer, stepping carefully between the flower beds. I've noticed you only do those things when you remember mortals expect them. When you're alone, you go completely still. A smile ghosted across his lips. Observant as always, he gestured to the roses. I come here when I need to remember that beautiful things can still grow, that not everything turns to ash. Tell me about Thalia, Alara said. She'd been wanting to ask for days, needing to understand the ghost that haunted him. Caspian's expression shuddered. Why? Because she matters to you. Because understanding your past helps me understand you. Alara touched a rose petal, feeling its impossible softness. And because I need to know what I'm competing with, that brought his head up sharply. You're not competing, aren't I? She met his eyes steadily. You loved her, lost her, grieved for 70 years. That's not something you just move past. Caspian was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he sighed an unnecessary gesture that told her how truly unsettled he was. She was human when we met, a physician's daughter in London, brilliant and brave and utterly unafraid of me. I was a century old, still young by vampire standards, still believing I could move between both worlds. He plucked a rose, studying it as if seeing something else entirely. We had 30 years together before she asked me to turn her. She was dying of consumption, and she wanted more time. So I gave it to her. His voice dropped. We had another 40 years after that. Happy years, mostly. And then House Rourke discovered our haven and killed her while I was away negotiating a treaty. Alara's chest ached for him. I'm sorry. I buried her in the garden behind our London house. Planted roses over her grave. Then I burned House Rourke's stronghold to the ground and killed 17 of their people in retaliation. He looked at her, and his eyes were empty. My father had to intervene to prevent full war. He called it justified rage. I called it inadequate, and you've been alone since. Yes. He set down the rose. I told myself it was safer that way. That loving mortals or vampires alike was foolish. That everyone I cared for became a target. I built walls, Alara, thick ones. I've been living behind them for 7 decades. What changed? She asked, though she suspected she knew. You. The word was simple, devastating. You opened your door to a freezing child without asking what it would cost. You stood against vampire attackers with nothing but courage and quick thinking. You look at me and see someone worth knowing instead of someone to fear or use. He moved closer, his hand rising to almost but not quite touch her face. You make me want to tear down those walls. And that terrifies me more than any war. Alara's breath caught. Caspian, I shouldn't want this. He continued, his voice rough. You deserve someone alive. Someone who can give you sunlight and children and a normal life. Not a creature who drinks blood and will watch you age while he remains frozen at 23. Not someone whose enemies will use you as leverage simply because you matter to him. Shouldn't I decide what I deserve? Alara asked. She closed the remaining distance between them, placing her palm flat against his chest, where a heartbeat should be. I'm not some naive girl who needs protection from her own choices. I know what you are. I know the risks. And I'm still here. His hand finally made contact, cupping her jaw with aching gentleness. Why? Why would you choose this? Because you're the first person since my father died who's treated me like I have value beyond what I can provide. The words spilled out, raw and honest. Marcus saw me as a path to my father's position. The people in my old life saw me as a scandal to be avoided. But you see me, all of me. The broken parts and the stubborn parts and the parts still trying to figure out who I am now. I see someone extraordinary, Caspian whispered. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. Someone brave and kind, and sharper than any blade. Someone I have no right to keep, but can't bear to lose. Then don't lose me. Alara tilted her face into his touch. Don't push me away because you think you're protecting me. Let me choose this. Choose you. The last word broke something in him. Caspian's control crumbled like ancient stone, and suddenly his mouth was on hers, desperate, reverent, achingly careful. Despite the hunger she could feel thrumming through him, Alara kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. He was cool against her warmth, solid and real and impossibly gentle for something so dangerous. The kiss tasted like loneliness ending, like years of isolation giving way to desperate connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard her from need, him from habit, Caspian rested his forehead against hers. This is madness, he murmured. Probably, Alara agreed. I've already lost everything respectable society values. Might as well add consorting with vampires to my list of scandals. His laugh was startled, genuine. Consorting. Such a delicate word for what I want to do with you. Heat flooded her cheeks. Which is everything. His voice dropped to something dark and promising. I want to learn every thought in that remarkable mind. I want to hear you laugh until I've memorized the sound. I want to watch you sleep and wake and argue with me about vampire law. He stopped himself, pulling back slightly. I want too much. More than I should take. What if I'm offering? Alara asked. Her pulse raced, visible in her throat, and she saw his eyes track the movement with predatory focus before he deliberately looked away. Don't offer yourself to me, Alara. Not yet. Not until you've truly understood what it means. His jaw clenched. I haven't fed in 3 days because I'm afraid of what might happen if I lose control around you. Your blood calls to me in ways I don't fully understand. If I were to taste you, you'd create a bond, she finished. You explained that already. A bond that would make you crave my bite the way I crave your blood. A bond that would let me feel your emotions, your fear, your desire. A bond that would tie you to me in ways that can't be easily broken. He stepped back, putting necessary distance between them. I won't do that to you. Not until you've had time to think clearly. Away from whatever this is between us, Alara wanted to argue, to insist she knew her own mind. But she saw the fear beneath his control, fear of hurting her, of binding her to something she might come to resent. All right, she said softly. We'll wait. We'll take this slowly. Relief and disappointment warred in his expression. Thank you. A bell chimed somewhere in the estate, deep and resonant. Caspian's entire body went rigid. What is it? Alara asked. The watch bells. His voice had gone flat, emotionless. Someone's crossed the outer wards. Someone powerful enough to trigger the alarms. Before Alara could respond, Ciro burst into the conservatory, her small face pale with fear. Caspian. House Valyria and House Crane envoys just arrived at the gates. Together, they're demanding an audience with House Morthen's lord regarding violations of the accord. And she swallowed hard. And they're bringing a tribunal. Caspian went utterly still. A tribunal? What does that mean? Alara asked, though dread was already pooling in her stomach. It means someone filed a formal complaint against House Morthen with the other houses. Caspian's eyes were silver ice. It means Gideon has outmaneuvered me. He's claiming I violated the accord by harboring a mortal who interfered in vampire affairs. He's calling for judgment. But I saved your life, which means you participated in a vampire conflict, which technically violates the neutrality clause mortals are supposed to maintain. His hands clenched into fists. And the penalty for such violation, if the tribunal rules against us, is death for you and severe sanctions for House Morthen. The conservatory suddenly felt too cold, too vast. Alara's mind raced, trying to find an angle, a loophole, anything. Then we fight it, she said. We present our case. We face the tribunal, Caspian interrupted, his voice gentle despite the steel beneath. And we pray that the other houses value justice over political opportunity. He looked at her, and she saw apology and determination in equal measure. But no matter what happens, I won't let them take you. I promise you that. It was a promise that might cost him everything. And as the bells continued to toll, summoning them to judgment, Alara realized their fragile beginning might end before it truly started. Chapter 9. The tribunal. The Great Hall of Morthen House had been transformed into a court. Ancient tapestries depicting centuries of vampire history lined the walls. Candles burned in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across the vaulted ceiling. At the far end, 3 chairs had been arranged on a raised platform, seats of judgment for the envoys who would decide Alara's fate. She stood beside Caspian in the center of the hall, acutely aware of the vampires gathered in the shadows. House Morthen's people, dozens of them, pale faces watching with predatory stillness. And somewhere among them, Gideon Rourke, wearing a satisfied smile that made Alara's skin crawl. Caspian had dressed for war in formal black, his hair pulled back severely, every inch the ancient lord. But his hand brushed hers, brief, hidden a reminder that beneath the ice was the man who'd kissed her in the conservatory hours ago. Whatever happens, he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear, follow my lead. Don't let them provoke you into saying anything rash. Before Alara could respond, the doors opened. 3 figures entered with a presence that made the air itself feel heavier. The first was a woman who looked barely 20, with copper hair cascading past her waist, and eyes the color of honey. She moved with fluid grace, wearing a gown of deep amber silk that whispered against the stone floor. House Valyria. Alara guessed the southern coastal house. The second was a man who appeared middle-aged, with silver threading through dark hair and a face carved from granite. His eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, and he wore simple gray robes that somehow conveyed more authority than any crown. House Crane. The neutral peacekeepers. The third figure made Alara's breath catch. He was tall and whip-thin, with skin so pale it seemed translucent and eyes like polished obsidian. He wore black leather and moved with a predator's economy, and when his gaze swept the room, several vampires flinched. Who is that? Alara whispered, Lord Silas Crane, Caspian replied, his voice carefully neutral. Head of House Crane and oldest surviving vampire in the 4 houses. He's over 700 years old. The 3 envoys took their seats. Lord Crane in the center, the copper-haired woman to his right, the silver-haired man to his left. This tribunal is convened, Lord Crane announced, his voice surprisingly soft, but carrying through the hall like a blade through silk. House Rourke has filed formal complaint against House Morthen, alleging violation of the Accord's neutrality clause. Specifically, that Lord Caspian Morthen did willfully involve a mortal his black eyes found Alara in vampire conflict, endangering the secrecy and stability of our kind. Gideon stepped forward from the shadows, bowing with mock deference. My lords, my lady, I speak for House Rourke in this matter. Proceed, the copper-haired woman said, her voice musical and dangerous. Gideon's smile was sharp. 6 nights ago, my associates and I tracked a threat to House Rourke, specifically the child Sir Morthen, who possesses intelligence valuable to our house's security. We discovered she'd been sheltered by a mortal woman, Alara Thorne. At Lord Morthen's direction, that's not Alara started. But Caspian's hand closed warmly on her wrist. When we attempted to retrieve the child per our rights under the pursuit clause, Gideon continued, the mortal interfered. She threatened House Rourke with tribunal action, cited the Accord, and used her knowledge of vampire law, knowledge she could only have gained from Lord Morthen to protect his assets. He turned to face Caspian directly. Lord Morthen has weaponized a mortal, made her a player in our conflicts. This violates every principle the Accord was founded upon. Murmurs rippled through the gathered vampires. Alara felt the weight of dozens of inhuman eyes assessing her, judging her. Lord Crane raised one thin hand, and silence fell instantly. Lord Morthen, your response? Caspian stepped forward, his bearing regal despite the accusation. The facts as Gideon presents them are accurate, but incomplete. Yes, I directed my sister to seek shelter with Miss Thorne during the storm. Yes, I educated her about our laws to ensure her survival. But I did not weaponize her. I protected both her and my sister from an unprovoked attack. Unprovoked? Gideon laughed. We have every right to pursue threats to our house. Sira is 7 years old and poses no threat to anyone, Caspian replied coldly. You hunted her to hurt me, to destabilize House Morthen during our transition of power. Don't pretend this was about security. The silver-haired envoy leaned forward. Be that as it may, the mortal's involvement remains problematic. The Accord exists to keep our existence secret from the broader human world. Educating mortals in our ways risks exposure. Miss Thorne has told no one, Caspian said. She has no family, no close friends, no reason to expose information that would only endanger her further. Yet, the copper-haired woman observed, she has no reason yet. But mortals are fickle, Lord Morthen. They betray, they gossip, they write memoirs. How can you guarantee her silence? Alara felt the trap closing. This wasn't really about the Accord, it was about giving the other houses leverage over Morthen. About weakening Caspian's position? I can guarantee it, Alara said, stepping forward before Caspian could stop her. Lord Crane's obsidian eyes fixed on her with unsettling intensity. You may speak, mortal, but choose your words carefully. Alara's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. I understand vampire law better than most mortals, because I studied law with my father. I'm trained to parse treaties and political documents. When Lord Morthen explained the Accord to me, I recognized its elegance. It's a masterwork of diplomatic balance. Flattery won't save you, Gideon sneered. I'm not flattering anyone. I'm stating facts. Alara turned to address the tribunal directly. The Accord's neutrality clause exists to prevent mortals from becoming soldiers in vampire wars. But I didn't fight for House Morthen, I prevented a fight. I used legal knowledge to de-escalate a situation that would have resulted in deaths on both sides, and possibly exposed your kind to mortal authorities. The silver-haired envoy tilted his head. Explain. If the battle had continued, someone would have died. Bodies would have been discovered. Questions would have been asked. Alara gestured to Gideon. House Rourke brought 5 vampires into a residential area. If they'd killed Lord Morthen or his guards, the local constabulary would have investigated. The Accord would have been threatened far more by that exposure than by one mortal learning enough law to cite it. Silence fell. Lord Crane steepled his fingers, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. You're clever, he said finally. Dangerous, clever. That makes you valuable or problematic depending on perspective. She's both, the copper-haired woman said. The question is, what do we do with her? Kill her? Gideon suggested casually. Clean, simple, sends a message about mortal involvement. Caspian's power flooded the room like ice water, making several younger vampires gasp. If you touch her, Gideon, I will end you and every member of House Rourke I can reach before the other houses stop me, threatening a tribunal witness. Gideon's smile widened. That's another violation. Enough. Lord Crane's soft voice cut through the tension. We will deliberate. Lord Morthen, Miss Thorne, you will wait in the antechamber. The rest of you, clear the hall. Caspian guided Alara through a side door into a small room lined with books. The moment the door closed, his control cracked. You shouldn't have spoken, he said, pacing like a caged predator. You gave them ammunition, proved you know too much, proved you're too intelligent to be dismissed as an ignorant bystander. What was I supposed to do? Let them condemn me without defending myself? Yes, he whirled to face her. Because now they see you as a threat or an asset, and either way, you're in more danger than before. Alara crossed her arms. I'm already in danger. Have been since I opened my door to Syrah. At least this way I'm fighting back. Caspian closed his eyes, visibly wrestling with frustration and fear. If they rule against you, if they demand your death to preserve the accord, I will refuse. I'll break with the other houses entirely, start a war that will consume everything. Do you understand? I will burn this world down before I let them execute you for the crime of surviving. The raw intensity in his voice stole her breath. Caspian, I love you. The words erupted from him like a confession torn free. I've been fighting it, telling myself it's too soon, too dangerous, too impossible. But I love you, Alara. Your courage, your mind, the way you see the best in me even when I'm showing you the worst. I love you, and I will not watch you die. Alara's eyes burned. She crossed to him, taking his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. Then we survive this, together. We're clever, both of us. We'll find a way. He kissed her desperately, his cool lips claiming hers with an urgency that spoke of fear and love and determination. She kissed him back just as fiercely, pouring everything she felt into it, all the impossible feelings she'd been nursing for a creature who should terrify her but instead made her feel more alive than she had in years. When they broke apart, Caspian rested his forehead against hers. If we survive this, I'm keeping you. Forever, if you'll have me. Forever sounds complicated, Alara whispered. But I'm willing to try. The door opened. Syrah stood there, her small face grave. They're ready. They've reached a decision. Caspian straightened, his armor sliding back into place. He offered Alara his arm, a gesture of solidarity and defiance. Chapter 10. Blood Oath. A new beginnings ceremony took place at midnight in Morthen House's oldest chapel, a stone chamber that predated the estate itself. Built when vampires and mortals still worshipped together in the old ways, Alara stood before an altar carved with symbols she didn't recognize. Caspian at her side, while the three tribunal envoys formed a semicircle around them. Syrah watched from the shadows, her small face solemn. The rest of House Morthen filled the pews, witnesses to a bond that would tie Alara to their world. Irrevocably, Lord Crane approached, with a silver chalice and an ornate dagger that gleamed in the candlelight. A blood oath is sacred and unbreakable, he intoned. It binds mortal to house, creates obligation and protection in equal measure. Miss Thorne, do you understand that once this oath is sworn, you cannot leave House Morthen's protection without mutual consent? That you will be subject to vampire law and held accountable to our justice? Alara's throat was dry, but her voice came steady. I understand. Do you understand that this bond will alter you? That consuming vampire blood creates changes minor but permanent that mark you as other to mortal society? She glanced at Caspian, who nodded almost imperceptibly. They'd discussed this in hurried whispers while the tribunal prepared. Enhanced healing, slightly extended lifespan, a psychic connection to her bonded house. Small changes, but enough to set her apart from humanity forever. I understand, Alara repeated. Then we proceed. Lord Crane handed the dagger to Caspian. As Lord of House Morthen, you will seal this bond with your blood. Miss Thorne will drink and swear her oath. Caspian took the blade, his expression unreadable, but his eyes when they met hers filled with questions. Are you certain? Is this truly what you want? Alara gave the smallest nod. Yes, I'm certain. He drew the blade across his palm without flinching. Dark blood welled up, almost black in the candlelight, and he let it drip into the chalice. The copper-haired envoy added wine from an ancient bottle, mixing mortal vintage with immortal essence. Ilara Thorn, Lord Crane said, offering her the chalice. Drink, and speak your oath. The chalice was heavy in her hands, the liquid inside dark as midnight. She could feel every eye in the chapel on her vampires waiting to see if she'd falter, if she'd realize the magnitude of what she was choosing and flee instead. She raised the chalice to her lips and drank. The taste was unlike anything she'd experienced, wine and copper and something electric that fizzed on her tongue. It burned, going down, a pleasant heat that spread through her chest and into her limbs. The room seemed to sharpen around her, colors more vivid, sounds more distinct. She could hear Caspian's unnecessary breathing, the rustle of fabric as someone shifted in the pews, the flutter of bat wings somewhere in the rafters. I, Ilara Thorn, she said, and her voice sounded different to her own ears, clearer, stronger. Swear myself to House Morthen. I pledge my loyalty to its lord, my silence to its secrets, and my faith to its protection. From this night forward, I am bound by blood and oath to walk between worlds, mortal born, but vampire sworn. This I vow, witnessed by the four houses, and sealed in blood. Power surged through the chapel like a wave. The candles flared bright, then settled. Ilara gasped as something clicked into place inside her, a connection, gossamer thin but unmistakable, linking her to Caspian and through him to every vampire bearing the Morthen name. She could feel them. Not thoughts, but presence, Syrah's fierce protectiveness, the guard's watchful vigilance, and strongest of all, Caspian's overwhelming relief and love. The chalice slipped from her nerveless fingers. Caspian caught it, setting it aside, then caught her as her knees buckled. I've got you, he murmured, holding her steady. It's overwhelming at first, the connection, but it will settle. Lord Crane nodded with satisfaction. The bond is sealed. Miss Thorne is now officially under House Morthen's protection and authority. The tribunal recognizes this arrangement as satisfying the Accord's requirements. His obsidian eyes found Gideon in the crowd. House Rourke's complaint is dismissed. Any further action against Miss Thorne will be considered an act of war against House Morthen. Gideon's face twisted with fury, but he bowed stiffly. House Rourke accepts the tribunal's judgment. Then this matter is concluded. The copper-haired woman stood, graceful as flowing water. House Valyria wishes House Morthen well in this new alliance. The silver-haired envoy simply nodded. House Crane will note this bond in our records. The 3 tribunal members departed with the same ceremony they'd arrived with, leaving Ilara standing in the chapel, forever changed, irrevocably bound to a world of darkness and ancient laws. The gathered vampires began to disperse, but Syrah ran forward, throwing her small arms around Ilara's waist. You stayed, the child whispered. You actually stayed. Ilara hugged her back, this 7-year-old who'd lived centuries. Of course I did. Someone has to keep your brother from brooding himself into oblivion. Syrah's laugh was pure and joyful. Thank you for choosing us. As the chapel emptied, Caspian led Ilara out into the garden, where roses bloomed impossibly in winter snow. They walked in silence, her hand in his, until they reached a stone bench beneath an ancient oak. How do you feel? He asked, searching her face. Different, strange, like I'm more myself than I've ever been. Ilara touched her chest, where the bond thrummed like a second heartbeat. I can feel you, your worry, your hope. It's intimate. It works both ways, Caspian admitted. I feel your determination, your courage, he paused, vulnerable, your love. If that's truly what I'm sensing, it is. Ilara turned to face him fully. I know it's fast. I know it's probably foolish. But yes, I love you. The man who grows impossible roses, who's been alone too long, who fights for those weaker than himself, even when it costs him. I love you, Caspian Morthen. His answering smile was like sunrise, beautiful and rare and worth every risk she'd taken. Then we're both fools together. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. I'll give you everything I can, Ilara. Time, if not eternity, protection, partnership, a place in this world you've chosen. What about forever? She asked softly. You said if we survived the tribunal, you'd keep me forever. But this bond doesn't make me immortal. I'll still age, still die. Caspian's expression grew serious. If you want immortality, true immortality, I would turn you. But not now. Not until you've lived fully as mortal. Until you've had time to be certain it's what you want, not what you think I want. And if I'm never certain, then I'll love you for however many years you have, and I'll grieve you when you're gone, and I'll carry your memory for the centuries after. He kissed her forehead. Either way, you're mine, and I'm yours. That's enough. Ilara pulled him down to kiss him properly, deep and claiming and full of promise. The bond between them sang, their emotions tangling together until she couldn't tell where her joy ended and his began. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Caspian rested his forehead against hers. So what happens now? Ilara asked. Now? Caspian's smile was wicked and warm. Now I teach you everything about this world you've joined. We rebuild House Morthen's alliances. We navigate vampire politics together. We prove to everyone who doubted us that a vampire lord and a disgraced magistrate's daughter can create something worth protecting. Sounds complicated. Impossibly so. He kissed her again. Softer this time. But nothing worthwhile is ever simple. In the distance, Sierra's laughter rang out as she chased shadows through the garden. Guards moved along the estate walls, keeping watch. Inside the manor, lights glowed warm and welcoming. Ilara had come to Grey Hollow seeking to disappear, to hide from shame and heartbreak. Instead, she'd found a child in the snow, a vampire lord with roses in his garden, and a world of darkness that somehow felt more honest than the daylight she'd left behind. Take me inside, she said, standing and pulling Caspian with her. Show me my new home. Teach me the names of everyone in House Morthen. Help me understand this impossible life I've chosen. Caspian's smile was radiant. As you wish, my lady. They walked back toward the manor, hand in hand, mortal and vampire, bound by blood and choice, and something deeper than either. Behind them, roses bloomed in defiance of winter, beautiful and impossible and stubbornly alive. The war with House Rourke wasn't over. Challenges would come, but they would face them together, the lonely vampire lord and the woman who'd taught him that kindness wasn't weakness, that love was worth the risk, and that sometimes the greatest courage was choosing to stay when every rational voice said to run. As they crossed the threshold into their shared future, Ilara felt the bond, pulse warm and certain in her chest. She was home. Epilogue note: Ilara Thorne became one of House Morthen's most valuable advisors, using her legal mind to navigate vampire politics and strengthen alliances. She and Caspian ruled together for 30 mortal years before she chose to be turned, unwilling to leave him to centuries of grief. They remained together still, partners in all things, proof that some loves transcend the boundaries between life and death.